Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind pushed hard against the dry grass as Elira Danton knelt beside her battered trunk, her fingers shaking while she folded a calico dress she had not worn in months. The tiny boarding house room was barely wide enough to stretch her arms, and yet the walls felt like they were pressing in. She did not hear the footsteps at first, only the creak of the floorboards behind her. "You going somewhere?" a man's voice asked, rough and low. Elira turned sharply. There he was, Quinn Ellard, dust still on his boots, his shirt damp at the collar from the long ride in. His hat was in his hand, held like something fragile, his eyes clear, steady, too knowing, locked with hers. "I am," she said, lifting her chin. "The stage comes through at dawn." He looked at the half-packed bag on the bed, then back at her. "I could give you a reason to stay." Her throat tightened. She could not afford to cry now, not again, not after everything. "I have to leave, Quinn." "No, you don't," he said, stepping into the room. "Not unless you truly want to." Elira's hands gripped the edge of the bed. "You think I want to be run out of town, to hear the whispers every time I walk into the mercantile? To see folks cross the street so they don't have to look at me?" "I do not care what they say," he said, voice firmer now. "And neither should you. You have done nothing wrong. I had a husband who drank himself to death and left me with nothing but a name folks spit like it burns their mouths. I took in 2 children who were left on my porch like stray pups, and now they call me a fool for loving them." Quinn's jaw tightened. "They are wrong. They are not the ones who have to feed them," she whispered. "They are not the ones who tuck them in at night or watch them cry for a mother who never came back." She looked up, her face pale and drawn. "I am tired, Quinn, I am so tired." He stepped closer. "You are not alone." Elira stared at him. "You do not know what you are saying." "I do." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, carved horse. He held it out to her. "Kellen dropped this the other day. I meant to give it back sooner." Her breath caught in her chest. "You have been watching them." "I have been watching all of you," he said. "Since the day you rode into town with blisters on your hands and those 2 little ones clinging to your skirts." She took the horse from him, her fingers brushing his. "Why? Because you are the strongest person I have ever seen." Elira lowered her eyes. "I am not strong, I am just what they left behind." Quinn reached for her hand. "You are what they should have stayed for." She did not pull away. Behind them, the door creaked wider. 2 small faces peeked in. Kellen, 6, with a gap in his front teeth, and tiny Kit, only 4, her curls wild and eyes wide with worry. Elira turned, her whole body softening as she crossed the room and knelt beside them. "It is all right," she murmured, hugging them both close. "We are just talking." Kellen looked past her to Quinn. "Are we still going away?" Elira opened her mouth, but her voice caught. Quinn knelt beside them. "Only if you want to," he said gently. Kit blinked up at him. "You have a horse," he smiled. "I do. Is it fast?" "The fastest." Kit looked at Elira. "Can we stay if he stays?" Elira closed her eyes. She felt Quinn beside her, steady and warm. She remembered the way he had fixed their fence without being asked, how he had brought bread from the bakery when he heard Kellen was sick. She remembered how he had waited in silence, never pushing, always there. She looked at him now, really looked. "You still offering that reason?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes." She let out a breath and stood, pulling the trunk shut. The latch clicked, final and sure. "All right," she said. "Then I will stay." Quinn reached for her hand, and this time she held on tight. Kellen's boots tapped against the porch slats as he and Kit sat with their legs dangling, each with a slice of bread and jam from the jar Quinn had brought that morning. The sun had crested the hills behind town, and already the heat clung to the earth like a second skin. Elira leaned against the post at the corner of the porch, arms folded, watching the children quietly while Quinn checked the reins on his horse tied to the hitching rail. "You always ride out this early?" she asked, her voice low, more curious than cautious. "I work a spread west of town, 40 head give or take. They don't wait for a man to finish his coffee," he said, not looking up as he adjusted the saddle cinch. "You ride for someone," he nodded. "Used to." Old Mr. Gaines passed last spring, left the place to no one. I've been keeping it going. She stepped down beside him, her skirts brushing his boot. That's a lot of land for one man. It is. He gave the reins a tug, then finally looked at her. You could come see it. If you wanted, Elira hesitated. It's not that I don't want to, I just don't know if I should, he didn't press. I'd make room for all three of you. She turned slightly, glancing at the children on the porch. Kit was humming softly, her fingers sticky with jam, and Kellen had taken to tracing letters in the dust with the toe of his shoe. I haven't been farther than the river since winter, she said. That's not far, he replied. It's far enough when you're carrying everything yourself. He studied her then, not with pity, but with a steadiness that made her feel like she hadn't been invisible all this time. I know you don't trust easy, he said, but I don't say things I don't mean. Elira drew a slow breath. What would we be to you? You'd be the part of my life I didn't know I needed until I saw it standing on my porch with a basket of wild plums and a little girl who called me Mr. Horse. Elira blinked, then gave a quiet laugh, surprised by the way it came out of her, like it hadn't been locked behind her ribs so long. She thought you lived in the barn, she said. I wouldn't mind that, he said. Long as it meant I got to see her wave at me every morning. The children had gone quiet, listening now. Kellen tilted his head toward them. Is he gonna stay for supper? Elira looked at Quinn. Only if he's willing to chop wood for the stove. I'll split enough to get you through next week. You offering that as a favor or a trade? As a beginning. She studied his face, the way he didn't flinch from her, looking like he'd already made up his mind about her, and she hadn't failed to measure up. There's a lot I don't know how to do, she said. You already do the hard parts. Quinn stepped back, swung into the saddle. His shadow stretched long across the yard, horse and man cast against the dust like something rooted to this place. I'll be back by dusk, he said. She narrowed her eyes against the sun. You sure? I'm sure. He touched the brim of his hat and turned his horse toward the west road, riding slow like he meant her to watch him go. Elira stood there until he disappeared over the rise. Then she turned to the children. Finish your bread, she said. We've got a lot of wood to stack before sundown. By midday, the back of Elira's neck was damp and the woodpile had doubled. She'd shown Kellen how to balance the kindling just right, thin branches crossed over thicker splits. And now he worked with a focus that made her chest ache. Kit had fallen asleep under the porch awning, one thumb in her mouth and Elira's shawl tucked around her shoulders. Elira stood, brushing bark dust from her skirts, and looked toward the west road. No sign of Quinn yet. She hadn't expected him sooner, but the quiet between now and then pressed on her like a weight. Inside, the kitchen was still warm from the morning's bread. She opened the window to let the wind roll through, carrying prairie dust and the faint scent of creek grass. She poured water from the pitcher into a basin and washed her hands. Her palms were red from the axe handle, and a thin blister puckered under her ring finger. The simple gold band she'd worn for years now rested in a drawer beneath a stack of old letters. She didn't hear the knock, only the door easing open behind her. Hope I'm not intruding, came a woman's voice, dry-edged but not unkind. Elira turned. Miss Tilda Greeley stood in the doorway, her hat pinned neat, her gloves creased from careful wear. She ran the boarding house 2 doors down and had once brought Elira a sack of potatoes when the pantry was bare. I saw you weren't at the mercantile this morning, Tilda said, stepping inside. Thought maybe you'd gone. I almost did. Tilda looked her over, eyes resting on the basin, the flour dusting the counter, the second pair of boots beside the door. You changed your mind. Elira nodded. The older woman glanced toward the porch, where Kellen was now humming softly as he stacked another armful of wood. That cowboy's been asking after you longer than he'd admit. I figured it'd come to this. I didn't know it would. Tilda set her gloves on the small table. I did. Elira leaned against the counter, arms folded. You came here to say that? No, I came to tell you that you're not the only woman who's had to start over with nothing but 2 hands and a stubborn heart. Folks around here forget quick, but I don't. Tilda paused, her eyes softening. You don't need their permission to stay. I don't need their judgment either. Then don't take it. Tilda stepped back toward the door. And if you ever need someone to sit with the little ones, I can spare an hour, maybe more. Elira blinked. Why would you offer that? Because I remember what it felt like to need help and not know who to ask. She tugged her gloves back on. Besides, I like the boy's manners. He called me ma'am and offered to sweep my steps. Elira smiled, just barely. He's still learning. Well, you're teaching him right. Tilda nodded once, then slipped out the door without waiting for thanks. Later, with the skillet hissing over the stove and the scent of salt pork thick in the air, the sound of hooves pulled Elira to the window. She didn't move right away, just watched as Quinn rode in slow, his shoulders sagged in a way they hadn't been that morning. He tied the horse and limped slightly as he stepped onto the porch. She opened the door before he knocked. "You're hurt," she said. "Not bad." Colt stumbled in a hole near the dry creek. "Through me, you should have come straight in." "I didn't want to track mud across your floor." She stepped aside. "Sit down." He lowered himself into the chair near the hearth with a wince, dust clinging to his sleeves and the side of his face scraped raw near the temple. "You need whiskey," she said, already reaching for the cloth and the bottle in the cupboard. "Had some at the line shack, but I wouldn't say no to more." She dabbed the cloth and knelt beside him. He didn't flinch as she touched his brow, though his jaw worked slightly. "Could have been worse," he said. "You've got blood dried down your neck." "Well, now I've got you to clean me up," she glanced at him. "You always this reckless, only lately." She poured a splash of whiskey onto the cloth and pressed gently. He hissed through his teeth. "You think you're proving something?" she asked. "No," he said. "I just needed to get back before supper." When she looked at him this time, something in her chest shifted. He wasn't asking for her trust, he was earning it 1 mile at a time. "You hungry?" she asked. "I could eat." She helped him to the table, set a plate in front of him. Kellen and Kit climbed up beside him without hesitation, and he poured gravy over their potatoes like he'd done it 100 times. Elira sat across from him. For the first time since arriving in this town, her hands didn't tremble when she picked up her fork. The next morning, mist clung to the edges of the tall grass, and the scent of wet earth drifted through the open window. Elira stirred a pot of cornmeal mush over the stove, her sleeves pushed to the elbows. The children were still abed, the house hushed except for the soft scrape of the spoon and the kettle singing low on the back burner. Quinn stepped in, his shoulder brushing the doorframe as he passed. He looked rested, a clean bandage wrapped at his temple and his shirt tucked proper beneath his suspenders. He paused at the hearth, glancing at the kettle. "You always up before the sun?" he asked. "I haven't slept past first light since Kit was born." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her move through the small kitchen. "Your hands are steady this morning." "They had work waiting," she said. "No time for shaking." Quinn shifted his weight. "I brought something." She turned, brow raised. He lifted a folded oilskin from beneath his coat and set it on the table. Ledger book. Belonged to Gaines. His accounts, grazing contracts, supply orders. "I thought maybe you'd help me make sense of it." Elira wiped her hands and opened it, flipping through the pages. Her eyes moved quick, scanning the figures and notes penned in a neat, slanted hand. "I can read it just fine," she said. "But why do you need my help?" He hesitated. "Because I never learned numbers like this. I know how many bales I need, how much salt to trade for feed, but I don't know how to track it past what's in front of me." Elira looked up. "And you're trusting me to do it?" "I am." She closed the book gently. "Then I'll need your supply receipts, too, anything from the last 3 months. He reached into his coat again and laid a smaller bundle beside the ledger. "I kept them all," he said. "Didn't know why, but I did. You were waiting on someone who could read what they meant." He gave a small nod. "Maybe I was." Kellen's bare feet padded softly across the floor behind them. He climbed onto the bench beside the table, rubbing his eyes. "Is there honey?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. Elira reached into the cupboard and handed him the jar. "Only a spoonful." "I know," he murmured, already dipping the spoon. Quinn watched him, then turned back to Elira. He's got your way of looking at things. Measured, like he's already seen how it ends. She poured the mush into 3 bowls, set them on the table, then poured a 4th and handed it to Quinn. "You're staying for breakfast now. I figured if I brought work, I'd earn a seat." "Fair enough," she said, sitting across from him. Kit came in last, her cheeks still pink with sleep, and climbed into Elira's lap without a word. Elira fed her slow, the child's head tucked beneath her chin. Quinn waited until the table quieted. "I was thinking," he said, keeping his voice low, "about that land west of town. The cabin's sound, but there's no real kitchen, just a hearth and a pot hook." Elira looked up. "If I added a lean-to on the north side, I could build out a proper stove bench. Maybe even a root cellar before the frost." She wiped Kit's mouth with the edge of her sleeve. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to be the one cooking in it." She stilled. "I know it's early," he said, "and I know you've carried more than your share. But I've got a place and you've got a family. Feels like maybe we could make something out of that." Elira shifted Kit to the bench and stood, her hands braced against the table. "You don't even know what I want," she said. Quinn looked at her, quiet again. "I want a place where no one knocks unless they're welcome. I want the children to sleep with full bellies and never wonder if someone's going to take them away. I want to plant something and know I'll be there to see it bloom." His voice was steady. "Then let me help you build it." She didn't answer right away. She crossed to the stove, poured another cup of coffee, and stood staring out the window as the sun pushed higher across the field. Then, softly, "If I come, we do it together." He rose from the bench. "We do," he said. She turned, and their eyes held his open, hers searching. "You'll need to show me the pasture lines," she said. "I will. And I won't be called your woman like I'm some prize." "You'll be called my wife," he said, quiet and sure. Elira's breath caught, not from surprise, but from the rightness of it. She looked once at the children, at the ledger, at the man standing across from her, and nodded. "Then we'd best start packing," she said. The wagon rolled slow across the ridgeline, its wheels creaking under the weight of bundled linens, dried beans, and a cradle Quinn had built from pine planks over the last 2 evenings. Elira sat beside him, reins in hand, her bonnet tied loose against the wind. Kellen rode ahead on a borrowed mare, steady and proud, while Kit dozed in her lap, clutching a rag doll stitched from Quinn's old shirt. The land opened before them in soft folds sagebrush and cottonwood, a creek glinting at the bottom of the draw. The house came into view as they crested the last rise. A single-story cabin with smoke curling from the chimney and a rail fence running half-finished along the pasture. The lean-to was already framed, cedar beams squared and braced, its roofline waiting for shingles. "You've been working quicker than you said," Elira murmured. "I was hoping you'd say yes sooner than I thought," Quinn said, his eyes on the horizon. She didn't smile, but her hand settled on his thigh, fingers curling gently. They reached the gate just as the sun tipped westward. Quinn dismounted and lifted Kit into his arms, brushing the dust from her cheeks. Kellen slid from the saddle and ran ahead to the porch, where a cedar branch hung nailed above the doorframe. Elira stepped down last. The air smelled of cut grass and hearth ash, and in that quiet space between their breaths, she felt something settle inside her, a stillness she hadn't known in years. "You left the door open," she said softly. "I wanted you to walk into it like it was always meant for you." Inside, the cabin was clean and spare. A table sat beneath the front window, already laid with a cloth. A small rocker waited near the hearth. On the far wall, a shelf held 3 tin plates and 4 pewter cups, each polished to a fine shine. Kellen ran a hand along the edge of the table. "Is this ours now?" Quinn crouched beside him. "It is." "Every board of it." Elira watched the boy's face change, not into something louder or brighter, but steadier. She turned and took in the room again, the way it held space for all of them. She moved to the small bedroom and set her bag near the foot of the bed. The quilt was already laid out, corners tucked neat. She ran her hand across the fabric, then sat down slowly, her eyes falling shut. Behind her, Quinn leaned against the doorframe. "I wasn't sure what color you'd want," he said, So I asked Miss Tilda. She said blue. Elira opened her eyes. You told her about this. I figured if she was going to help with the children, she ought to know where to find them. Elira stood again. You asked her to help, I asked her to be part of it, not because you needed saving. Because you deserved a hand. She stepped close, her hand resting against his chest. I'm not used to someone thinking like that. He took her hand in both of his. Then let me be the first. They stood there a long while, the room warming as the sun dipped behind the trees. When Kit poked her head in and asked for supper, Elira kissed Quinn's cheek and moved past him without a word. He followed, his hand brushing her back with a quiet surety. That evening they sat on the porch after the children had gone to sleep. The stars came out one by one, slow and bright. Elira rested her head on Quinn's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist. I used to think maybe I'd die before I got to feel something like this, she said. You're not dying, he said. You're just living different now. She was quiet for a moment. I never thought I'd belong somewhere again. You don't belong somewhere, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. You belong with someone. She turned her face to his, and in the hush of the night they kissed slow, certain, nothing hurried in it. When they drew apart, her hand cupped his jaw. I love you, she said. He held her gaze. I've been waiting to hear you say that. You knew. I had hope. They didn't speak again that night, just sat wrapped in each other's arms, the wind soft through the grass, the stars clear above them. Years passed and the house grew with them. The lean-to became a kitchen and the pasture fence circled out across the field. A second cradle came and then a third. Miss Tilda came every Wednesday, teaching Kit her letters and letting Kellen help in the garden. He grew tall and quiet like Quinn, his hands calloused by 14. Elira kept the ledger still, balanced in her lap each Sunday evening by the fire. She taught Quinn the columns, and he taught her the rhythms of calving season and when to salt the meat before hanging it. They never spoke of the old years. Not because they forgot, but because they no longer needed to carry them alone. One evening, as they stood watching the children chase chickens through the yard, Quinn slipped his hand into hers. You ever miss town? He asked. She shook her head. No. This is where I was always meant to end up. He kissed her hand, slow and reverent, and when the wind rose through the cottonwoods, carrying the laughter of their children and the scent of warm bread from the oven, Elira leaned into him, her heart quiet and full. They had made a life. Together. And it held.